Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Well, hi folks, and welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism. Lovely to have you back again. It's been a week since we last had a wee chat. I hope you and yours are well. A lot going on as always. The war's going on, the killings going on. Terrible. We'll be discussing that for sure. And we'll be discussing other things that are happening. Lots happening this week, as you know. We've had the 10-year economic plan from the SNP. We've had the GRA bill put in, and a few other things. And I'm joined today by my two usual compadres, Iain Lawson and the old Coatbridge Cavalier himself, Phil Boswell. But we're delighted to welcome back to the show Eva Comrie, of the Alba Party, the Equalities Officer. So I'm delighted to welcome them here tonight.
Thank you very much, Roddy. Great to be here. As you know, the immortal bionic one-legged woman that won't wheesht, and I'd like that my background today is honest as well as perhaps a little controversial.
Good, we're delighted.
Love the competition. Love the competition.
And we've got you there, Phil. You've just gone back to India. How was your journey? Was it eventful or?
It's never not eventful. Everything you do in India is a challenge, and it's just how life is. You know, it makes you appreciate. You know, we really ought to appreciate what we've got in Europe, and hence the concerns of what's going on just now.
You're sounding enthusiastic about being back in India, there, Phil. I can feel it. And Mr. Lawson, how's things? How's your handicap in golf?
Well, I managed to play 18 holes last Monday, which is the first time I've managed to play 18 since I got here, thanks to my fall in the bank car park. So I'm feeling better, you know. I'm going to play more in the weeks ahead.
But is your golf any better, or is it still? You know,
it was all right. I mean, it was still a 2-figure score rather than a 3-figure score. So that's okay considering my depleted state at the moment.
Well, gentlemen, you know, as I said at the introduction there, Phil, unfortunately the war still goes on, and the killing's still happening. We're now, I'm sure Iain's going to talk about nuclear power station being attacked. There doesn't seem any end in sight.
No, and there will be. There are some factors here that people are not aware of that are going to determine how serious this is going to be, how much more serious it's going to be, how much more serious can you get when there's killing and there's invasion. But this isn't a full strip. This isn't thousands of tanks rolling across the border. This is strategic. Some of the cities are now under attack, and there's a few things that are going to stop this from being, in my opinion, and from the opinion of the experts that we've been fortunate enough to be able to listen to. You know, the fact that the Russians can't afford this. They can't afford another war. Their economy's smaller than Italy's. This is not the behemoth that NATO pretends we need, and our press pretend we need to substantiate or justify the existence of NATO expansionism. The real power in the world is China, of course. But no, it's really sad to see. There's another couple of reasons that it's not going to go on. The Russians themselves don't want to. You can see the protests, which is wonderful to see, absolutely wonderful to see. But you know, we've backed to this bear into a corner, as many have said, and you know, I'm looking to the future. What's the outcome when this eventually resolves? And it will resolve, and the Americans won't intervene, and we won't intervene because we won't put boots on the ground. You know, the whole philosophy of might is right, which is these global powers do what they want, is something that we need to consider ourselves. And I've for some time I've been fortunate enough to meet some people, some players in this. When I visited NATO and I visited SHAPE as part of a delegation from SNP, and I was very interested in what a lot were saying. And I am leaning towards a European army. I say maybe even kick America out of NATO and let the Chinese and the Americans not slug out. We don't want the violence, but you know, these games that undoubtedly NATO have played to poke the bear in the eye, as it were. It would be nice to have a third peaceful force that may one day incorporate the Russians, because the Russians are more frightened. They've got a huge border with China. China's a much bigger threat to the Russians than Europe or America is. So there's lots of stuff that isn't being considered here. Anyway, that's a wee bit off piste, shall we say?
Yeah,
but,
just a wee bit off piste there. Iain,
never stopped them in the past.
No, true. Iain, are you?
And this is war.
Are you at all optimistic that this is going to end anytime soon?
I don't think it's going to end anytime soon, because I think the Ukrainians are quite deliberately intent to fight this to the bitter death. I think there's a terrible misunderstanding about what's going on here. I mean, I hear NATO getting the blame for expanding up to Russia's borders. NATO didn't let a lot of these countries in after their independence. Estonia wanted into NATO in day one. You know, in 1991, when they became independent, it took them to 2004, and they only were admitted to NATO at the same time as they were being granted membership to the European Union. The same's true in Latvia and Lithuania. And, you know, these countries, like Ukraine, all lived in enormous fear of Russia, and with some considerable justification. I mean, for these countries, the Second World War ended in 1991. It didn't end in 1945 like it ended in Scotland or England or anywhere else. Their war went on for over 50 years, and they were treated abysmally by the Russians. You know, the KGB ruled their countries.
So the Russians were treated badly by the Russian KGB.
Well, exactly, but I'm just making the point. You need to understand why these nations will fight to the death to never be back in the Russian fold. They've enjoyed freedom since 1991. They like it. Their economies have picked up. They're not living in the 1930s or 40s with old, outdated industrial machinery. You know, they can see it. The reason they're wanting to be in NATO is not for weapons. It's for Article 5 security. They want to know that Russia is going to be unable to invade them again. And that's not for military reasons. It's for economic reasons, because they need massive inward investment. And the only way they can get that investment is if the investors are confident that the Russians aren't going to come back in the next week and take the country over again. If you look at Estonia's progress since 1991, it was pretty steady. Mid-90s were very difficult, picking up a wee bit into the 2000s. But after 2004, once they had that Article 5 protection, investment flooded in to the country and their economy and living standards and everything else. Now, the Ukrainians are sitting watching this. It's their neighbours, you know, and they're saying, we want some of that, and quite rightly. And the other thing is, you know, we talk about the hypocrisy of NATO and all the rest of it. This week, Belarus agreed to take nuclear weapons from Russia and station them in their country. If you look at the map, 3 NATO countries, Latvia, Lithuania and Poland, border Belarus. So basically what's happening here is Russia and Belarus are saying it's all right for them to station nuclear weapons in the border of NATO countries. But it's not permissible for Lithuania, Ukraine, to even join NATO. Nothing about weapons, just even to be a member. So the hypocrisy is absolutely rank with them. And we're dealing with a responsible nation. I mean, that attack in the nuclear power station, the Chechen mercenaries of Putin's last night, could have been catastrophic. Not just, by the way, for the rest of Europe, it could have been catastrophic for the Russians as well, because the radiation will hit them probably more than anybody else, because the prevailing wind from there is actually east.
Yeah. Well, I'd just say, you know, Belarus and Russia, you know, it's NATO, it's come to them. They've not gone to NATO. So, but one other thing, Eva, you know, a lot of people are saying, and I've made the point that as an independent country, Ukraine should be able to do what it wants. If it wants to join NATO, it should be allowed to, because it's a sovereign state. But our pal, well, I know you've said that as well, Iain, but our pal, Jason McCann, came out with a great thing, and it's very true. If that's the case, then you've got to surely then embrace that if Iran, Palestine and North Korea want nuclear weapons, as independents, they should be allowed to get them. Otherwise, that's hypocrisy, is it not?
No, not really, because...
Well, I was asking even that, Iain. I was asking Iain.
Right, you're getting the hard one on, you go.
But then politics is all about hypocrisy, is it not? That's how it functions in the main. That the man in the street's switched off by politics and politicians on a daily basis, because what most folk perceive is that politicians are self-serving and they're mainly dishonest. Now, that's not the truth across the board, but that's public perception. And perhaps especially for folk like me who remember not where they were when JFK was assassinated, but where they were when we had Live Aid and Band Aid and we were going to feed the world and rid the world of hunger and starvation and war. And we had the Berlin Wall coming down. We remembered where we were then and we were full of hope. And look where we are now. Nothing has changed over the course of my entire lifetime in the context of wars and self-serving and self-interest. So, we haven't actually evolved as a species very much at all. What we need are robust, sensible, honest politicians who will go in there and negotiate very, very quickly and with a degree of strength and support behind them to try to find a solution which is actually a compromise across the board, but it's person-centred and ultimately restores peace and saves lives. All the kidology in the background about who said what to whom and when, where did it start?
It's irrelevant.
That stuff has become irrelevant when you look at these poor souls yet again, displaced, starving, bairns hiding in underground stations however many years ago here. It's unacceptable.
But Iain, another thing that gets me is that it's just, I hate to go back, but if you go back to 1939 with Poland, when we swore to help them and they were actually just left abandoned. It seems to me the Ukraine, whether they were egged on or not, whatever, but they've kind of, because they're getting handed weapons, but they've really been a wee bit abandoned. I feel really sorry for the Ukrainian people. They didn't ask to be invaded. And there doesn't seem to be light at the end of the tunnel for them to escape from this onslaught.
Yeah,
and no help is coming. The cavalry are not coming.
They didn't ask Roddy to, be bombed out their houses. And
that's what I'm saying. That's exactly what I said.
They asked to have the right to make their own decisions about what was best for their country without interference from any Americans or Russia. And they were denied that opportunity by Putin. It's as simple as that. I mean, I'm very aware of all these things because I grew up in Clydebank. And you went back to 1939. I go back to 1941, when over 2 nights, a town of 50,000 inhabitants was left with 8 houses only untouched. I used to get as a wee boy and I played in spare ground. It wasn't spare ground, it was where the tenements had stood
used to be
before.
Yeah.
And I'd play in the ground and I'd dig up wee bits of china. And I'd take them in age 5, 6 and show them, and my mum would say, look what I've found, look what I've found. And my mum would just sort of say, well done. Away you go. She never ever told me why it was there. But it was there because it was somebody's china. So I'm very, very strongly against bombing of innocent civilians. I've seen it. I went to school through bombed out tenements. And I went to school, by the way, in 1957. They were still clearing up 16 years later the damage that was done to Clydebank that time. So I've got absolutely no time. And worse still, it's been confirmed today, I don't know if you get the news in Britain, but it's been confirmed today the use of cluster bombs. Now, these cluster bombs are banned under the Geneva Convention, but they've been used on residential areas in Kyiv, and it's been confirmed by international bodies as well. Now, you just can't have this. Eva's right. No wonder people are turned off politics when they see what politicians can do. Ordinary people wouldn't get you into this mess. I know lots of nice Russians, met loads of nice Russians when I worked and lived in Estonia. They're decent people, but the leadership is corrupt. Absolutely, it's a gangster leadership. That's why you have all these problems. Well, so, I think the solution, I'll just very quickly tell you what I think the solution is. The solution is to let Ukraine join NATO if it wants, but it must be on a proviso that there can be no foreign troops or missiles stationed in the land. Likewise, that should be applied to all the countries that border Russia. So in other words, you'd be taking troops and missiles out of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, the rest of them. Now that gives Putin a face-saving excuse to stop what he's doing and go back to Russia. It doesn't in the slightest affect the overall security position of NATO, because NATO's got weapons that can move in to a whole host of other countries and be sitting there. So that's the solution.
Well, Phil, that solution,
or a Ukrainian victory.
That
not going to happen either.
But the point is that what Iain's suggesting, Phil, not a chance that Biden would agree to that. That would be virtually the wipeout of the Democratic Party. The Americans would go tonto if they were seen to take a step back by removing troops and missiles from parts of Eastern Europe. That's my opinion. What do you think?
The Article 5 is what they want.
Yes, the Americans don't give a damn about Ukraine or any other country. What they want is the expansion of NATO, which is run by the Americans. It's a NATO run the show. We all know that. If people want to know what's going on, we are not the people. The four of us, no disrespect, are not the people we should be listening to. We should be listening to Mearsheimer and other experts on this matter from Chicago University who lay out the facts as they see them objectively from a political science perspective. And they do it coldly. I mean, they're talking about, you talk about attacking this nuclear plant. One of I think it was even Craig Murray that came out with that. One of his suggestions, it may have been a strategic. I mean, if you look at the map of where the Russians are impacting, this is not, as I said, a mass invasion for army of occupation. This is taking out the Ukrainian military. Key areas such as the nuclear facilities, because as Craig Murray pointed out, because he's much sharper and more experienced than we are on this could be something that a suicide attack could easily do at a last minute. You don't want, after what happened in Chernobyl, you don't want these facilities in the hands of the desperate at a last minute stand. Also, handing out weapons to untrained civilians is completely irresponsible. That makes you a legitimate target. You're not protected under the Geneva Convention if you've got a weapon and you're discharging it. Because I've seen women being shown how to fire these weapons who clearly don't know how to handle it, and young kids, not kids, but young boys who clearly have no training. That is highly. Let's not pretend that these are the good guys and the bad guys. The people who are playing this game are in the hands of the Americans in the West, and as equally as guilty of what the Russians are. Because what the other thing that we haven't talked about is the disputed 13,000 to 14,000 executions by Ukrainians in Donbass.
But two wrongs don't make a right, though, Phil.
I know, but nobody's talking about it. No, this is the thing. We all don't want this war. We don't want this war. And there's no danger it's going to spill over. It will not spill over into Europe. Like I said, for the simple fact it can't. Russia cannot afford it. Russia cannot afford even to keep this going. It's not going to happen. But fingers crossed. We pray, we hope and pray that things settle down soon. Yeah. And to be honest, we're not the experts. I'm certainly not the expert on this, but the little I've seen is there's a lot more to this than meets the eye.
Yeah. Eva, Iain touched on it, he's right. Russians run with gangsters, but
London. They're running London as well.
We've got Don Johnson down in London. We've got gangsters running the UK. But while it's important in the Ukraine, and we will keep mentioning it, folks, as long as it's going on, and giving our tuppence worth. As Phil says, we're not experts, but we'll give our tuppence worth. But there's things closer to home, Eva, which are quite worrying. And our gangsters on both sides of the border are causing us concern, are they not?
I think the concern I've got is that we have, in inverted commas, politicians running the Scottish government who seem, when it comes to the question of independence, to be incapable of walking and chewing gum at the same time. But if you take independence out of the equation and you look at other things, they seem hell-bent on taking a wrecking ball to all of the good stuff that used to happen in Scotland. The GRA, I know, is what you're referring to, and that yesterday was no disappointment in the slightest. Shona Robson stuttered and stammered her way through a pre-written statement. She'd have been as well sticking it on the internet for us all to read for all the good that she did, standing there making a fool of herself. And I know she's not here with a right to reply, but I'll happily bait her anywhere about the meaning and the impact of this bill. It's actually infuriating for me to know that there's so much disinformation coming out of the Scottish Government. But what's helpful for folk to know is there's a number of websites where they'll get accurate information. One of the really good sources is called Fair Play for Women, and they did a big long thread yesterday pulling apart everything that Shona Robson had said. Equally interesting is that I understand SNP MSPs have been given the usual sheet of information that they've to refer to when they're answering questions about the GRA reform. I've led to believe that much of what is written there is entirely wrong.
It is. I've seen it.
Right. Well, I understand that there is a claim that this bill gives no new rights to trans people, and that's really quite untrue. So I'd be grateful for your indulgence, Roddy, if I could maybe explain as a lawyer, but from a layman's perspective, hopefully, and in layman's language, what the GRA did and what the reform proposes.
Please do, because the public haven't been told.
Public have not been told. So in 2004, the GRA was passed primarily because it was established in the European courts that legislation in the UK was unfair to trans people in the context mainly of family life and the right to privacy. So what the Gender Recognition Act says is that if you have a diagnosis, i.e. a medical certificate that says that you suffer from a condition called gender dysphoria, and if you then live in the gender into which you wish to transition for a period of 2 years, you can apply for a gender recognition certificate. However, the GRA preamble actually says that it's an act to reform the law as it relates to gender. In reality, the process that I've just described, once you go through it and you get a certificate, it doesn't enable you to change your gender because nobody can tell you what gender identity is. It actually enables you to get the sex marker on your birth certificate changed. So if you look at your birth certificate, it doesn't say gender, it says sex. So under the GRA, medical diagnosis, 2 years living in the opposite sex, in fact, and then you get your certificate and you can do what you want with that. There is an argument, though, that this does not cut across the Equality Act of 2010 because the Equality Act includes rights for people who fall under one of the protected characteristics, and obviously what I'm referring to is the right to single-sex spaces and single-sex facilities, including, for example, single-sex sports. So what you've now got in Scotland is a position whereby the Scottish Government and the SNP in particular are trying to be leaders in Europe in relation to what they describe as trans rights. I've yet to hear any cogent, sensible, rational or meaningful explanation from anybody about what rights trans people don't have. But the bill introduced yesterday actually says that the new regime will do away completely with the need for the medical diagnosis and reduce the period of 2 years down to a period of 3 months. And what you have to do if you want to change the sex marker on your birth certificate, because that's what it'll do, is live in the other gender, i.e. other sex, for 3 months. It's not described or defined how you do that. So I don't know if you're a man and you wake up one morning and you think, today I feel like a lady, like a certain actor, if that's you deciding that you're going to trans or if it's something different, because there is no definition. So you live in the other sex for 3 months, whatever that means, and then you fill out a form saying that you want to transition and you send the form in and you get a 3-month review period and then you get your certificate and that's that. The only thing you probably have to provide is, and it's been said, a gas bill will do with your new name on it. So if you're a man, you have to have a bill with a lady's name in it. Quite how that works also beats me. So given that the medical bit's gone, the definition of transgender or transsexual has also gone. And now what you've got is an absolutely limitless, unmeasured umbrella of people entitled, under the terms of this bill, to describe themselves as trans. In reality, the number of people in the UK that suffered from gender dysphoria is probably about 0.02%. It's not any more than that. But what the legislation will enable people to do, if passed, is that anybody who says change sex is going to be able to do it. There are no real safeguards. And interestingly, the word hyphenated self-identification, I don't think appears in the SNP guidance issued to their MSPs.
No, it doesn't.
Applicants completing what's called a statutory declaration, as if that was going to be enough. They also say there'll be criminal penalties for people that lie. And there'll be a process if you want to detransition, although the statutory declaration will say that the intent is to live in the new gender oblique sex forevermore. So you can see where this is heading. And of course, the Scottish Government, I would say, are willfully blind. And I use that phrase very deliberately because they are being willful. They're being disingenuous. And I'm quite happy to accuse them of dishonesty.
Can I just read something out to you, Eva, and for the guys here to hear this as well, in case you haven't, I'm sure you have. But one of the things, and I want to quote it exactly, verbatim, what Shona Robson said in the Parliament yesterday. There is no evidence that predatory and abusive men have ever had to pretend to be anything else to carry out abusive and predatory behaviour. I have never heard so much nonsense in my life, Eva.
Well, the difficulty for me with that, Roddy, is that I know, having worked as a lawyer for 40 odd years, I know sheriffs know, lawyers know, police officers know, prison officers know, the whole world knows that there are male predators who will go to any lengths to deceive and to worm their way in and to groom. You know, I wrote it in a blog that you published a while ago. Predator doesn't have predator tattooed on his forehead. A predator can be male or female, and nobody can tell what a predator looks like in the majority of cases.
No, exactly. Sorry. For example, Iain, as I alluded to today, as a grandpa, I know how concerned you are as well. You know, there could be a BBC disc jockey. There could be an Australian with a didgeridoo. There could be a royal prince that's after young women, children. There was an utter nonsense, that statement from Shona Robson.
Certainly it was. I mean, it's a long time since my childhood, but I remember, you know, being told quite outright by parents, by teachers, you know, be careful talking to strangers. you know, there's a danger. Now, I don't think for a minute that danger has disappeared. All the years I've been growing up, not being a child, I tell my granddaughter, be careful who you speak to and don't take them all at face value. And if you're ever worried about someone that approaches you, go and speak to another adult. There's another adult next door or nearby and tell them that you're worried. Now, since I told my granddaughter that, there's been at least one occasion with her where that's exactly what she did, where she was getting spoken to by a man who she was finding extremely creepy. And she saw a couple of women standing nearby and she went over and she told them, please, do you mind if I stand with you? Because that man's very much worrying me about what he's saying. You know, she was worried sufficiently a couple of days later to tell me that she'd done it. So, I mean, I think, you know, for a government minister to stand up in a parliament and come out with a lie on that scale, that's a resignation. That's a resignation issue. She should be forced to resign because that's letting down every child in this country.
Tell me, the question I asked in that, Phil, and I'll ask it to you guys here, was Shona Robson willfully lying to us, the public, the general public, or was she lying to herself to justify what she was being asked to stand up and say in the Parliament, knowing full well that she had to say it, otherwise she who must be obeyed would have become very angry? Which is it? Is she telling lies?
And as an ex-cop, I fully endorse everything Eva's already articulated about this. We know about this. We know what sexual predators do and how they play this game. And the important thing is we should be listening to the people who are engaged, who really work at this. I know something Eva put out earlier. I read on Alan Petrie at Glenlaw House, and he was talking about online grooming. He said, he showed the ridiculous nature of what was stated by Shona, was that if you never heard the grooming, online grooming, do you not know what they pretend to be someone else? I mean, it's just as everybody says. And they also went on to say, the police is the police. We've always said, be careful as parents. You always say, be careful you engage with them, maybe pretend to be someone other than they seem to be. But Abstract Women as a group, it's a trans group, it's another thing I think Eva put up, and they put this, I thought, quite well. They're fully transitioned women who have been men and went through the whole process, through the old method and done it the long way around. And they say it is dangerous to women and trans women, and only men's voices are being heard here. Now, I agree with them on most of that. The last part is actually, I think it's only the trans or men that are being heard, or trans women / men being heard, because most men are not being consulted on this. We seem to have been excluded from this GRI thing by quite a degree, and I'm certainly not standing by and doing nothing about it. That there's no consultation. I mean, women are the ones who will be victimised here. That's the thing. Our traditional role in society as parents, as husbands, as brothers, is one in a protective role, because we know it's predominantly men that do the attacking. And therefore, it's mostly men who are physically stronger. These are facts. This is nah. This is we should all be very angry. We really need to do something about it. And now that it's out in the open, we can see this for what it is, and the people who back it need to be seen for what they are, exposing our children to risk, and that's unacceptable.
It's Eva. Maybe I'm being cynical, but this tells me this is not the final destination for these people.
Well, I would like to come in the back of something that Phil said there, because what this is about is people being able to change their sex on their birth certificate. And I think that guidance that you've seen there that the SNP issued to their MSPs refers to the meaning and the impact of a GRC, and it says something along the lines of that women's existing single-sex rights in terms of the Equality Act 2010 will continue to be protected and respected by the Scottish Government. That is not the truth, because the policy at the moment enables trans-identifying males who claim that they're women without a GRC to be admitted to various different women's places. There's controversy ongoing about boys playing in girls' football teams, that kind of thing. And, some of these are kids that don't have a GRC and they're being allowed to play, and the girls can't object to this. You've got the case of this swimmer in America that we all know about, and we're also be nice and kind to them. So no, I don't think that this is where it'll end, but the reality is that if you allow a man to say that he's a woman on his own say-so alone, by that very fact, indeed, what you've done is you have altered completely the meaning of the Equality Act 2010 in practice, because the stonewall advice that the Scottish Government takes and hands out to everybody else hints, and in some places actually says out loud what the law is not, but hints that it is, that gender identity is protected. Gender identity is not protected. Gender reassignment is and sex is, but gender identity is not. So what you've got is a mission creep here, where the government says one thing, they enable something different. And what they do is they have so much set down in legislation and other stuff in guidance. And the guidance is equally controversial as the legislation, because Roddy, you've covered this before, that there's guidance for schools in relation to transgender pupils, and there's other guidance in relation to child protection matters. And both of these sets of guidance issued by the Scottish Government to organisations, including schools, is done in that fashion so that the Scottish Government can elude responsibility. So that your complaint if something goes wrong is against the local authority, not against the Scottish Government, who can say it wasn't us. And they're doing the same thing here, because what they're saying is, we're just doing a wee administrative tidying up job here. We're not affecting the Equality Act. It is up to everybody else, not us, to decide how to interpret the Equality Act. when what they should be doing is saying, if you've got a GRC, then in terms of single-sex spaces and single-sex services, you must always respect your natal sex, not your sex that you say you've transitioned into. Because most people don't understand that most people who hold a GRC never have surgery. So the surgery is a bit of a red herring anyway, because surgery won't change your sex from one to the other. It'll just make your appearance different. But where you are now, and I think this is where we're heading in future if this bill is passed, is that you will continue to have circumstances where the likes of Marks and Spencers and Sainsbury's permit men, fully intact male bodies, into women's changing rooms.
No.
Or schools are told that transgender pupils have to be given the services and the support and access to places that conform with the gender into which they are transitioning, and that's boys and girls toilets. That's very clearly what it is. But that guidance and the child protection guidance both say that the parents and carers don't have to be told if the child is claiming at school to be trans and being treated as trans. That can be a secret that is kept from the parents. The child protection guidance also says that if a child aged 13 but under 16 is having sex and the child doesn't want the parents to know, then teachers or others that have that information are authorised by the guidance to keep it confidential and not convey that information to the parents or carers. So these two areas are obviously of concern. I see Phil particularly nodding his head, because that's how grooming starts, is about keeping secrets. So I think we've embarked upon a sinister path, and the attitude of the Scottish Government in telling everybody to be kind to each other. And, you know, the problem here is not trans people. The problem's predators. We know that. So why do you open the door to the predators? Because they're doing that with this legislation, and they've done it with these two different sets of guidance. What else are they up to that we don't know about yet?
Well, that's true. Iain, Eva touched on there on plausible deniability by the Scottish Government. But I'd like to just go back that we know this is very important to Nicola Sturgeon. She's really been pressing it. But to go back to when Brexit began, I believe Mike Russell was our spokesman in Europe, but he was pushed aside, and Nicola went centre stage and toured England and toured the TV studios and very much led on the Brexit, let's have another referendum, the people's referendum, etc., and abandon independence, as we know. And then when COVID came along, she threw aside Jean Freeman, the health minister, and she took centre stage because she wanted to be there, and she took all the code, and she even brought in her boy of the eyelashes, Humza, and he was cast aside while she takes centre stage to be on the television on the Nicola show every day. Now this comes up and thinking, on you go, Shauna. Step up, love. It's on your shoulders. Am I being a cynic, Iain, or am I right?
Well, there's not a chance. I mean, there's no votes to be found, and she knows it, in GRA, and everybody's told her. And this, I tell you now, this is going to cause the SNP a lot of problems voting-wise in the weeks and months ahead, because, I think Phil's right. People don't know too much about this yet, but as they find out, and they are finding out, then there's going to be an enormous backlash. And I mean, I hope the Alba Party is one example. Don't go wasting your time going round knocking doors, hoping to find a parent. Go to the school gates. Go to the school gates of every school in your area and let the parents know. And they'll tell the grandparents. And before you know it, there'll be a real snowball. That's what you need to do. You need to get this message out to parents, because parents won't tolerate it. Parents, raising their child are protective of that child. And they certainly don't want a government that's not, respecting that care and concern that they should be doing. So, I mean, that's the route to take this on and emphasise, as Eva was saying, emphasise self-ID, because that's the real weak link in all this, where people on a whim can do whatever they like and get in wherever they like. It's very, very dangerous.
But it's not as if it's going to happen. There's already males in.
I know it's happening. Yeah, I know.
This is already. Once, I mean, I saw on social media, so I can't 100% confirm this, but I'm certainly going to investigate it. But someone put up that between 2004 and 2020, there were 400 GRC certificates obtained. And that same time, between the Scottish Government to trans quangos has given the equivalent of £14,125 per head for every one of those 400.
Yeah.
We've got almost 1 million people in Scotland who are on disability. The equivalent payment to them has been 3.5 pence. Now, I know who I'd like to be sending the 14 grand on.
Well, I featured that. I had a series of articles by a lady called Daisy Walker, who highlighted the money that was going in to these organisations, and also highlighted how few people were talking about here. The tiny number and this vast amount of resource being put out. Full-time jobs, part-time jobs, creating an army. That's what they've done. It's a woke army that's been created. For political reasons. They don't just confine themselves to this one issue. They're right across the board. And it's an attacking society being paid for with our own taxes. Got to end.
Roddy, you mentioned the prisons there, and I always like to quote this because I'm quoting it verbatim from a fellow called James Morton, obviously government advisor. And what he says is the policy in relation to transgender people in custody represented a bridgehead for its advocacy. In 2018, the then manager of the Scottish Trans Alliance, James Morton, wrote, "We strategised that by working intensively with the Scottish Prison Service to support them to include trans women as women on a self-declaration basis within very challenging circumstances, we would be able to ensure that all other public services should be able to do likewise." So there you've got it. Since at least 2018, self-identification has been allowed and authorised in Scottish prisons, and clearly the Scottish Government are culpable for that. It transpires from the work that ForWomen.Scot did that the consultation that was done before the transgender policy in prisons was written excluded female prisoners and excluded most groups that are for women that are regarded by the government as not being inclusive because they don't include men who have transitioned as women. So it's already there, and that creep is continuing.
Phil, I've asked a lot of people who have been debating with me, haranguing me about this, and I said, and again, alluded to it, say, well, what rights is it you don't have? And they can never say to you, they never tell you what that right is that they're missing out on. And it's just, oh, you know. Well, no, I don't. That's why I'm asking you. Oh, you know. And then they're off on a tangent. You're a transphobe, racist, whatever. You've got young daughters. This must be a big concern to you.
Yeah, and I've thought about this a lot. First, not just the destruction of family values, which is a very conservative view, but, as certainly as you get older, I think one of the reasons some of us get a little more conservative, and I don't say that lightly because I'm no conservative, is that you appreciate that they're actually
You're not a Tory. You're maybe conservative, but not a Tory.
Well, on some issues I am, but I'm more a socialist than what I would define on some of the major issues. But parents have skin in the game, quite literally. These people don't. You look at the people, the trans rights activists and activists, they're young people, they're maybe gay, childless, and they're running about with this ideological possession. I mean, there's a whole philosophy around an excess of virtue can be a vice, too much compassion, and you think, well, that doesn't sound right. But anyway, but there's the time for it. But certainly, rights and responsibility are what's mismanaged here, because my rights are your responsibility and your rights are my responsibility. And what most of these people are run about shouting about, trans rights, X rights, what they're not doing is taking responsibility for everyone else's rights. So the radical trans people are not standing up for women's rights that are pre-existing and have been well fought for and rightly in place in a civilized society like ours. Instead, they keep marching down this this road. They're not turning around. They're not considering anyone else's opinion, because your rights don't matter. to them. This is what happens to the ideologically possessed. Whereas what we want as adults, as parents, as people who take responsibility in our lives, is an understanding that we are responsible for all our society, and that we ought not to be blazing down the road screaming. I mean, I'm sick of these children. It's so, and as adults, you're getting very, very base, illogical arguments coming out of the mouths of people who are in senior positions and who should know better. And it's a simple failure to accept the responsibility for the role, the position in society, and to understand that they're representing all of us, not some crazy tail that's wagging the current government dog.
Eva, if I could say to you, people like, for example, Joanna Cherry, in particular, but lesbians in general have been getting a real hard time from these tra activists, have they not?
It's really quite offensive. And obviously we all know what's happened to Joanna over the years and the amount of stick that she's taken. But what is developing now is a position whereby some suspect trans identifying males who say that they're female claim to be lesbians, and they have a dislike which at times borders on a crazy hatred of lesbians who refuse to date them. And I cannot for the life of me understand why these trans-identifying males think that these women are anything other than perfectly entitled to refuse to date them on the basis that they're not attracted to them. And how a trans-identifying male with a male intact body thinks that there's something wrong whereby a female who is attracted to females will not go out with him, and he deserves to have, you know, an apology and all of this sort of stuff because she'll not go with him. It seems to me to be a wee bit of an insight into the mentality of some of these folk.
Yes.
Very difficult, but very, very unfortunate, and really needs to be addressed before somebody gets hurt more than they already have been.
Yeah,
as guys, they should be used to rejection as guys. It happens.
Well, I was going to say, Iain, when you and I were growing up, I mean, a knockback was actually, you know, it toughens you up for
Yep.
I used to knock back regularly. I'd love that rule had been about when I was growing up. I'm sorry, love, you cannot knock me back. You're going to have to dance with me and then go home and sleep with me. So yeah, that's the law. I mean, it is ridiculous. It is insanity. And they're standing there with straight faces and saying that's going to be the law.
The snowflakes must not be rejected.
Iain,
in case they
explain
melt.
this to me. You are my guru. You're my source of knowledge. Tell me why this is right.
Well, it's not right.
No shit.
You know, I mean, I wouldn't even attempt. It's just bizarre. And, you know, the more you think about it, the more ridiculous it gets. You know, I mean, I've got to congratulate Eva as she was going through the intricacies of the various positions taken up there. It was quite a task to do it, you know, because it just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And when you listen to it, it sounds ridiculous. Now, why is that? Well, I'll tell you, it is ridiculous. That's why it sounds, you know.
Yeah.
Jeez.
And this schism, Eva, has, without a shadow of a doubt, divided the SNP party, divided the Yes movement, created 5 new independence parties, and have us much further away now from independence than we've ever been, all to placate a very, very under 1% of the population. I can't work that one out.
1%.
It's 0.04, I believe, or 0.02. Something ridiculous like that, is it not, Eva?
It's very low. It's certainly less than 1%. But it depends on your definition of trans, because there isn't really a proper definition of trans, because the one the government uses is that, in effect, you feel like that you're a different gender from the gender assigned to you at birth. That wee mark on my forehead's the brick wall, or the impact of the brick wall. Nobody's assigned a sex at birth. Your sex is observed. You're not assigned a gender at birth. Gender and sex are not the same thing. So it's just identity politics. I've self-identified as many things in my life. I've been the Tooth Fairy and I've been Santa, and I'm now immortal. What I'm never going to be is able to self-identify myself into being a man. And see, if I did, I would know damn fine that it was as much kidology as my performance as the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus were.
Iain, this is true. If 5 years ago you and I, Phil, and Techie had been in the pub, and I said, I have this idea, Iain. And I'd said, we just declare yourself to be a woman. You get into women's prisons, women's sports. You'd be like, taxi for Roddy. He's had enough to drink. Get him up the road.
Absolutely. But I mean, women's sports are a great example of it. I mean, I was looking there at the US National Championships, and there was one transgender person who won 3 different categories. And when you compared the times that she won each of these events with, it would have been last place in the men's equivalent competitions. And last place by a long, long way, So, I mean, it just destroys women's sport if this is allowed. Particularly in a country like where I am at the moment in America, where there's quite significant sponsorship for athletes if they're promising they get free college prices, they get this, that, and the other. These transgender athletes are stealing those places. That's what's happening. They're getting a free education through it. They're getting the sponsorship, even though, and they're denying all the biological women that opportunity.
Yeah. There was that women's swimmer in America, maybe she's at Penn University, I think. It is at the Penn University. He was 463rd in the world rankings as a male. So he switched sides. He's now number 1, and he's beaten records like with 20 seconds. It's scandalous. It's cheap. If you take drugs to improve your performance, you get banned for life.
Yeah.
But just switch your sex. That's all right. You're the world champion. Iain, I'm on that taxi again up the road.
Well, I'm joining you.
It's just
I'm joining you in the taxi.
It's nonsense.
Uber are going to be busy.
Yeah, we were talking a couple of weeks ago as well about the money that they're getting, and we figured in the SNP budget, it was £5 million.
It's huge.
Money. A lot of money.
A lot of jobs, because they don't spend it on transgender people, they spend it on jobs for themselves. I mean, that's where the money goes.
But Phil, they've come out this week as well, because we've got a couple of things. Time's running on here. And the SNP government, that lovely wee lassie, Kate Forbes, come out with the SNP 10-year plan, which has been pasted for numerous reasons. One, they seem to have a new economic plan every 6 months, and when everyone goes, nah, that's not good, they come out with another one, and this is the big one. I don't know what they've got, more mandates or economic plans. I'm not quite sure, but this one told you several things. One, there was no mention of independence. There was no mention of currency. There was no mention of central bank. But we're having an independence referendum in 2023. That doesn't tie up for me. Can you tie that up for me?
No, you can't tie that one up. In defence of something like this, the problem with this, the planning of economics or like any infrastructure or anything major is it's a long job. It's a long window. You've really got to plan way ahead to make stuff work. And the cyclical nature of governments, they come in for 4 or 5 years and they change their attitudes. So somebody else comes in and changes it completely. So if you set out, in the defence of it, setting out a 10-year plan, if we're stuck in the union, is fine if that's what you say it is. If you say, look, this is not what we want to do, but as responsible individuals here, this is what we will do if we don't get voted for, but we're going for 2023 and we're going to... The problem is we've heard it so many times before. We've been made so many promises about independence referendums, or we're going to action this, or we're going to have a Scottish-owned energy company, or we're going to... All of the things that we have been promised have failed to reach fruition. Mm-hmm. And a 10-year plan's fine to have in a back burner. It's not a big deal, but it gives the impression of someone desperately, and I don't blame Kate because she's a capable young woman, although not in economics. That's not her background. But it strikes an organisation that's desperately grasping for small wins, the small victories, because they can't deal with the big stuff. That's the problem with the SNP at the minute. What currency is difficult. You really have to apply yourself to it. You have to alienate some, because not everyone will agree with you. It's like the whole NATO argument.
Yeah, but surely the conference made a decision on that, which has been ignored.
Don't matter. Conference don't matter anymore.
If you actually look at the constitution of the SNP, they are the governing body of the party. The point is they should have a policy. But the thing, Iain, if I could bring you in this one, because you're a political animal as well as a businessman, albeit retired. He retired early, folks. He was young when he retired. But you would have a plan. As Phil's alluded to, you'd say, well, here's the 10-year devolution plan, but here, and you would hold it up as a shining light, surely, and say, but here's what we could do if we were independent, and this would be the currency, and this is what we would do. We would put investment here, investment there. We would have a joined up manufacturing, etc. Isn't that what you would do if you were serious about independence?
Well, I think your last sentence there sums it up. If you were serious about independence, that's precisely how you would campaign. Here's what we can do in the next 10 years as part of the union. Here's what we could do if we were independent in that same period. And you can look to examples. I'm not a great one for 10-year plans, because I think, particularly in economics, there's so much changes over that period that, you could have the best film in the world at the start, but it's completely shot to pieces a few years later.
It's window dressing.
The last folk that I remember getting in for 10-year plans was the Russians and their agricultural policy. And it wasn't exactly anything to boast about. So, that's one of the reasons I'm against it. But, there's nothing wrong with having a plan. I mean, the best example of a plan I could think of was Ireland. Ireland, many years ago, the two main parties sat down at the time and they said, we've got to stop this one party coming in and doing this, and then another party coming in and changing all that. What we've got to do is sit down and agree a 10-year programme with certain policies which we won't change, that will actually carry this programme right through. And it led to a great period of Irish advance and great inward investment, because companies knew where they stood in Ireland for a 10-year period with guarantees that it wouldn't change. The problem, of course, is at the end of the 10 years, the agreement falls apart. And, what happened then was you had huge inflation, you had house prices going through the roof in Ireland. Ireland at the moment can't take any inward investment because there's no housing to house any more workers. That's how bad it's got in Ireland.
Ireland's full up.
Through their success, exactly. Absolutely full up. So, there's so much we could do in Scotland.
For sure.
We've got such talent in Scotland. Really, really good, competent people. But they're held down, and what happens if they've been held down is they get frustrated. And a lot of them leave Scotland to go elsewhere where they can get some investment, where they can get some backing, and we lose that talent. And somehow or other, we've got to reverse that.
Yeah. Did you either see anything in the 10-year plan that excited you, or you thought, well, that's good?
Well, Roddy, I live in Alva in Clackmannanshire, and every year, for 160 years, except for the last couple with the pandemic, we have the famous famous Alva Games every July. And voting for the SNP, for me, has turned into one of these experiences that you have when you go to the shows, and you're standing there in front of that thing where you have to chuck the ball, and if it lands on a certain number, you get a prize. And like Iain said, this is what you could have won, but this is what you did win. So instead of going away home with a big Winnie the Pooh balloon, you've got the wee stupid toy that falls to bits as soon as you try and build the damn thing up. That's where we've got to with the SNP. So I didn't believe it until I see it. 2007 to 2014, Scotland to a large extent was transformed. So there was big ticket ideas.
Absolutely.
The envelope was constantly getting pushed, and the attitude wasn't, oh, you can't do that. The attitude was, we're doing it, why the hell no? And where we've gone now is we've gone back to, oh, you can't do that. Now We better know, Boris will no give us this, he'll no give us that, but we can kid them on, carrot, 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 dangle, dangle. So that's all this 10-year plan is. It's just another pound of carrots.
Yeah, and it'll be replaced by another one in 6 months. We're coming towards the end here. Phil, one other thing that happened this week, which is worth noting, is that the Scottish Investment Bank chief, Isla McTaggart, walked away from her 235 grand a year post. We don't know why, and the First Minister's not, when questioned, wouldn't answer. But it's not encouraging when the chief of your investment bank walks away. That's got to be a concern.
It is, and if nobody's talking about it, what do we really know? Unless you've got inside information, then who knows? Because there could be a genuine personal family reason for it. However, the whole performance in banking, I was in the APPG in banking world with a few, Roger Mullen and Caravan and Michelle Thompson, George Caravan, and they were excellent on banking, and we were really working with some very insightful people as to how mismanaged the banking system is. The Green Bank, the Scottish Investment Bank, I'm sure I haven't been up to date with what they've been doing, but every aspirational reach has fallen short. Nothing has come to where we hoped it would originally, and our banking system is nothing like the German banking system. People want to know about this. Look at the German banking system. It's efficient. It's got specific banks that support specific people. Lots of small banks to look after the small and medium-sized enterprises. We used to have 50% of our employees before all the COVID and everything kicked in were employed in Scotland by small and medium-sized enterprises. I guarantee you now. Look how much cardboard's in your blue wheelie bin. So much money because of COVID has been transferred, not just Big Pharma, I'm talking about Amazon, into the hands of the few to the cost of what? Well, you're paying for it, but count all the pubs that are shut, count all the small and medium-sized businesses that went out of business, that can't keep going in restaurants. This is a step change. We need to be very careful here, and we need to focus. I would love to know what the current employee rates are and what the change has been in terms of corporations versus SMEs. And a song for another day. But yeah, it's a warning sign. Scottish Investment Bank, if she walks away from that, a woman in charge of that job, it's a fantastic job. Who knows? But it's not a good sign.
At 235 grand a year, I used to have to do 2 nights on a Sunday to make that kind of money. Anyway, Eva, Iain, Phil, thank you. Our hour is up. The time flies in when you're having good chit-chat. Thank you very much for assisting me today. And I'll see you all soon. In fact, I'll see some of you sooner than... Exactly. But to you viewers, I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I have been with my friends and colleagues here. And until we see you all again soon, please take care.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.